Hi, welcome to our vocal expressiveness lecture, chapter 11, and we are going to be talking about rate and pausing this week. So our objectives for the end of this chapter, which will conclude next week, is you'll be able to demonstrate your understanding of the vocal variables, and that's rate, pausing, intonation, and inflection. You'll be able to develop the skills necessary to control all of these variables during oral reading and also to instill meaning and interest into spontaneous speech. You'll show us that you have mastered these skills when you have a presentation of a prepared oral reading. So let's first talk about vocal expressiveness. I'm going to give you an example. The book called them Mr. Excitement. But the person I'm focusing is on my high school chemistry teacher, Mr. Gary. And Mr. Gary was a very sweet, kind man, but he was just a little old. He probably should have retired earlier. And I only say that because during his lectures, he would fall asleep in the middle of them. He had complete monotone. He was reading everything off the slide. I don't think he was very interested in the topics that he had to talk to us about. And that in a combination of our class started at 7:15 in the morning, and that's just insanely early now that I think about it. So, yes, Mr. Excitement, for me, that's Mr. Gary, and I know we all have had an experience with a pastor or a teacher or some sort of presenter who just doesn't use vocal expressiveness at all and is lacking thereof in excitement. So that is one reason why vocal expressiveness is important. Let's discuss. So some more reasons. One, it's one of the biggest factors that you need to have in keeping your listeners' attention and interest. And as a speaker, that is your job. It's your job to use vocal expressiveness to be interesting and engaging. You have to think, well, these people, maybe not all of them are paying to be here like you are, right? Like you are all students, you are all coming and you say, hey, this is something that's going to bring me value. So I'm already interested in what you have to say, right? Maybe it's that you're doing an elevator pitch and the person that you're speaking to already doesn't want to listen to you. Well, you have to combat that. You have to make what you have to say sound so interesting that you can gain and keep their attention, even when they already don't want to listen to you. Also, vocal expressiveness can really clarify the meaning behind what you're trying to say when the actual words that you say may be a little wishy-washy. So, again, like if you are going to your boss and you say, hey, is it okay if I come in tomorrow an hour late? I've got a doctor's appointment. And the words your boss says is, yes, that's fine, right? Yes, that's fine. But the way they say it is like, yes, that's fine. Yeah, no worries, Then the meaning is like, totally don't need to worry about it. Versus if they say it a different way that's concerning and you're like, oh man, I probably shouldn't do this too much, right? And then the third reason that the text highlights as to why vocal expressiveness is so important is it tells your listeners what you think of them, and it tells what you think about the words that you are saying, and it also gives us an insight on what you feel about yourself. Listeners tend to respect and really believe a person who uses vocal expressiveness effectively. So now we're going to talk about reading out loud. And it may be something that you're like, I don't really know if this applies to me. Maybe your career, you don't think that you really will be reading aloud that often. Maybe this really does apply to you and you're like, oh no, I read aloud a lot. So let's just talk about some instances where you'd be reading aloud. Maybe if you have to read a newspaper article to other people. Maybe you're giving directions, car directions. Maybe you're giving directions on how to bake a cake or how to put a dresser together. Maybe there's a letter that you're supposed to read or an expense report that you're reading out loud during a business meeting or at a conference. Maybe you're a keynote speaker. And then everyone who has kids are probably going to read stories out loud to their children. So you want to avoid, a lot of people who read out loud will have an artificial, unemotional, and impersonal way of speaking out loud. And this is very, very normal. A lot of people have it. However, it's really not that great whenever you're trying to express meaning because it's hard to follow. It's really hard to follow along when you're not inflating your pitch, when you're not pausing, when you're not, doing this kind of crescendo of sound that kind of gives emphasis on what you're saying. It's just harder to pay attention to. So, the components of vocal expression are rate, pausing, intonation, and inflection. And inflection is what the book calls stress. And let's see. We are going to be talking about just rate and pausing this class period. So rate of speech affects what we think about the speaker and how important we think their message is. So if someone has a really fast rate, then chances are we're not going to take them as seriously as if someone who has a very slow and deliberate rate. I've been speaking with a slow and deliberate rate, at least for this one slide. There is a time and a place where you're going to have a rapid rate. And it doesn't mean everything that you say is going to be so slow and deliberate because that's annoying. So even within the rate that you speak, if it's slow, you're going to have times when you're faster. And the things that you say are going to be faster. And some things that you say are going to be slower. But typically, if you have a faster rate, people will think it's light, frivolous, unimportant. Maybe it's humorous, maybe it's really funny, but it's just not something that's very serious. When you talk about something very serious, especially if you listen to newscasters and how they talk about the coronavirus, because that's a very serious thing, and it has high importance. What they say has high importance for us to hear because it affects our jobs and our lives, and if we're going to get money back from the government, if they'll give us a stimulus package. So that is all said in a very slow rate because we are emphasizing its need of importance. Rate kind of gives you a little insight and a little look into the speaker's physical and emotional states. If someone is calm, if they're sad or tired, their rate tends to slow down. If they're really excited about something, their rate tends to increase. Okay, so now we're going to talk about rate and how it affects comprehension. So the process of comprehension, we're going to go over that first. It's all really just managed by your brain, and of course you need your ears. So you need your ears and your brain. And so what happens, the first step is your ears take in the acoustic elements, right? And your brain hears it, okay? And the acoustic elements, if we remember from the beginning of the year, are like pitch, its intensity, its loudness. They're the sound waves that come in. So sound waves hit your ear, and it gets translated into this, mechanical actually sound, and your brain hears it. And your brain associates those elements, those acoustic elements, with meaning. So each word has meaning, right? But then it kind of takes the conglomeration of all those words that have its own individual meaning, right? It translates it to a big idea, one big concept, to what this string of words together, what does it symbolize? And then finally, everyone has their own life experiences that are unique to them, and this impacts the way that you see the world. And so you take what you hear and you spin it through what your perspective is. And it does not mean that it's going to always be different from what you actually hear, but it could be. Based on the experiences that you have, you can perceive what someone says to be different from what they actually say. So continuing with how rate affects comprehension, just as we said, like, you can hear what someone is saying. I'm doing air quotes here, but that doesn't mean that you have processed or understood what they said. So as fast as words are coming out of my mouth, you're hearing them at that same rate. But depending on what words I say and what concepts or ideas I say, your processing rate is going to be faster or slower. So if what I'm talking to you about is my day, you asked me about how my day is doing. You're very familiar with all the concepts of a good day or a bad day. You've likely grown up, as this is a very common conversation to have with your parents, your friends, your boyfriend at the end of the day, that kind of stuff. So it's not a very complex conversation. But, so since it's not complex, your brain is going to process it much faster. But if I was going to tell you about a research article that I'm studying or that I'm going through, and it's more complex, the words that I use, you don't use it on a daily basis, or maybe you don't hear these words all the time, so you're not as familiar with them. Doesn't mean you don't know them, right? Obviously, y'all are intelligent people. It means, but you don't use them every day. So like a word good is easier to process than a word ecstatic, right? So it just will take longer because the content is more complex or abstract. So kind of how rate affects comprehension. It's very interesting. If the speaker does not have good vocal expressiveness, then the listener will do one of two things. One, they'll either work harder to understand the meaning, or they'll give up trying to understand completely. And I guess a third option is also, if someone is working so hard to understand what you're trying to say, there's going to come to a point where it's exhausting, really. And so you'll work hard and then you'll just be like, oh, this is too much. I just can't figure it out. I'm done, So in either case, it's unlikely that the speaker's point would be understood. And then also think about this. Even if it's one person is working really hard to understand the meaning, they are going to be missing some of what you say because they're going to be trying to process while they're also trying to listen and hear more of what you're saying. So if your rate of speech is really fast and the concepts that you're talking about is very abstract and very complex, then chances are they're just going to miss something. Okay, so audience. Knowing your audience is more than half the battle. Keep in mind that disorders are not always visible. It's easy to forget that they exist. And so these people in your audience may have disorders that put them at a baseline below average. So I know in particular that we have students in our class who the jobs that they want to do is like to work at church. So we have congregations. I know there's people who want to be teachers or people who want to work with war veterans. And so you have to think about the people who you're speaking to, right? Your audience. It's hard to tell who has an auditory processing disorder, which really is, it just takes longer to process what someone is saying. It's really hard to tell who has a hearing loss. Hearing loss doesn't mean that you're deaf. Having hearing loss, it's very typical for war veterans. They are, especially people who are like having IEDs and being around explosive sounds, things like a fireworks level, after a certain period of time, that really can do some damage on your ears. And it doesn't mean you're completely deaf if you have hearing loss. There's different levels of it. But it just, if you are unable to reach that first step where there's acoustic information that you're missing, then your brain does not have the information that it needs to fully form processing, to fully process what is coming through because it's already missing code, right? So just be very careful in when you speak, because just know that you're speaking to an audience who may not have the baseline that everyone typically will expect to have. Your rate of delivery must match the meaning that you have. So an example of this, I don't know if y'all have seen, is The Masked Singer. It's really fun. I love that show. Singers come on. They're not all professional singers, but they're all in this huge costume, and you get to kind of guess, well, who is this famous person? They're all famous, but you know, they're not all singers. So they all sing, and you have to guess who they are. It's really fun. But the second season came out, and it was excruciatingly slow. Each episode, typically it's an hour, but the second season, they were like, nah, we're going to make them 2 hours long. And that was just so frustrating because it's the same content. They didn't increase how many people were coming out and singing, and it was just so slow. I totally got out of it. If it wasn't for my boyfriend, I would have stopped watching the show when it came out a third season. But they thankfully figured out that they were losing a lot of people were losing a lot of interest because the rate of delivery was so slow. So they had to pick it back up again, and so it came out to be 1 hour segments. So this just kind of demonstrates if a speaker delivers a relatively unimportant message slowly and deliberately, then you'll probably become very impatient or bored having to wait that long for the message to be ended when you've already figured out what they're trying to say a long time ago. So make sure that your rate of delivery matches the meaning behind it. So what's an appropriate length or rate? You're going to determine your own rate as part of your homework, but you'll be able to compare back to this to see what's typical and what you should be at. So people have found when they do silent reading, that's the highest rate that they have. And when they have conversational speaking, that's the lowest or the slowest rate that they have. A normal oral reading rate is going to be between 150 and 180 words per minute. And the middle of that range is a sweet spot. So that's 160 to 170 words per minute. This is the area where what you're saying is most effective and it's the easiest to be understood. Your goal should be about 150 words per minute, especially the slower you are. Remember, the more important and more serious the message that you have, the slower your rate of speech should be. So 150 is a pretty good range for an important concept. So there's a couple exercises, just general exercises I wanted to point out. So one is you can practice reading passages that have words that are 160 to 170 words, and you can change your own rate, whether it's slowing down or speeding up, so that you can get to that exactly 1 minute mark. So if you can say 160 to 170 words per minute, then you are at the right area, and that's where you need to be. And you can also practice speaking spontaneously. So not just reading what you're going to say, but speaking spontaneously at 160 to 170 words per minute. And so the way that you can check yourself is you use a tape recorder, you record yourself talking, and you play it back to yourself. You'll count the number of words that you say in 1 minute, and you'll either make sure that you go a little bit faster or a little bit slower, depending on where you are and how many words per minute you speak. Okay, so duration. This is duration of your vowels, and it's really interesting how it impacts your rate of speech. When you have vowels that are not fully articulated, then your words become clipped, making your rate of speech faster. And when you have vowels, when you produce them and they're prolonged, words become longer, making your rate of speech much slower. And quite frankly, more annoying. So you want to find a place where it's a good split, a good halfway point. This is kind of a little interesting side point. Some words like mountain, right? That has a glottal stop, typically on the in part, mountain. So a glottal stop, if you're doing running speech, means that you really shorten that vowel and you kind of skip over it. So it's mountain instead of mountain. Mountain. Other words are like fountain, fountain, fountain. This happens a lot on N's and L's, and vowels that are connected with those. So just something for you to be aware of, to make sure that you fully articulate your words. Okay, so pausing. This is more than just how you control your rate, right? There's so many reasons to use pausing and why we use pausing. We use pausing to emphasize meaning. We use pausing to clarify what we're saying. Excuse me. We use pausing to bring attention in, to help us give time for people to reflect on what was said. Maybe we just use it for a variety, to just kind of mix it up and make it not boring, right? We can use pausing to indicate that we're changing different ideas, different topics, or we're changing moods. And we also use pausing to breathe. So we have short pauses and long pauses. Short pauses are kind of the things that we've just talked about now, like just previously. And then long pauses are what we use at the end of thought groups. And so a thought group is just very similar to a sentence. It's a complete thought that can stand on its own. So pausing should be frequent enough where you don't run out of breath at all during your speech. And if you're running out of breath, you're really not controlling your breath flow efficiently, and you really need to use more pauses and maybe even work on increasing your breath support. So if you're running out of breath, that's not good. Okay, so we're going to discuss your homework. So there are going to be quite a few videos that you need to do. You can upload them separately and have each have its own video link, or you can put them a couple together. First, let me just tell you first. First, you need to determine your own rate of speaking, and this does not need to be a video. It's going to be on page 306, figure 11.1 or 11-1. So it has a reading passage that you'll read, and you'll do a silent reading rate, and you'll enter, it has some numbers there that you'll enter, and it will give you a rate in words per minute for silent reading, for oral reading, and for conversational reading rate. So go ahead and just follow the directions for that, and you'll need to either attach a picture with it filled out in the discussion post, or you can write it out, or you can just give us your information. But just make sure that it's titled. Like if you just type in what the information is, it's silent reading rate is, and then you give us the breakdown. Okay. You'll also need to video yourself doing one timed reading from page 308 to 309, and you have a choice of 4. So just choose one out of those 4 options. And this reading has 160 to 170 words, and you want to read it until you can just take 1 minute for you to read it out loud. So if you need to make it faster or slower, if you need to make your rate of speech faster and slower, you need to do that so that you can get 160 to 170 words out in about a minute. And then there's a second timed reading that you need to do, and this is on pages 309 and 310. And there's only 2 choices for you to pick from. And this one is more of a serious speech, and so it has fewer words, 120 to 150 words, and you should aim for about 50 seconds to a minute to read the whole passage. So take a video of yourself doing those. You'll also find from page 310 to 311, there's a duration exercises. And so I want you to choose one of the duration exercises from the choice of 3 on those pages, and you'll upload it to YouTube, copy and paste a link to discussion post. And the last video is you'll be doing pausing exercises, and that's found on page 313 to 315. And so the way it works is there's a number 1, and it first gives you instruction, and then it gives you a passage. So I want you to record yourself reading the passage. Number 2, it gives you instructions, and then it has the passage. And then number 3, it gives you an instruction, and then it has, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different passages that you can choose from. So you only have to do one pausing exercise. So that's either number 1, number 2, or one of the letters, one of the choices from number 3. And whatever one you pick, that's all that you have to do for that pausing exercise. And again, upload it to YouTube, copy and paste a link into your discussion post. And we just have 3 reflection questions and have you to respond to a classmate. So it may seem like a lot. Let me show you the reflection questions. That's describe your rate of speech. Was it too fast or too slow? Was it just right? Did the rate of speech exercises seem to help you? And which exercise did you find most helpful and why? So again, this homework may seem like a lot this week, but they're very short exercises. I took a breakdown for how long it should take you to do everything, to record everything. And so for you to do everything up until the 3 reflections, it's about 12 minutes. And so I just would love to give you an abundance of caution and just give yourself about 30 minutes to do this. You still have to write your 3 reflection questions, and you'll still have to respond to a classmate. So in total for all of that, I think it's about 30 minutes. That's totally doable. And yes, so if you have any questions, just let me know. Or Dr. Davis, if you have questions on an extension or anything regarding grading, definitely direct those questions to Dr. Davis. But if you have questions about the content of this PowerPoint, you can feel free to contact either one of us. Or if you have difficulty, if you need some clarification on what you need to do. So in summary, it's do your videos, do your reflection questions, and respond to your classmates. All right, y'all. I hope you had a great week, and I'll be coming with you next week. So have a good one.